So I actually have the distinct honor of being the first person to present this new product that we've launched. This solution is actually, we've done this in partnership with AWS as a collaborative effort. And really what we're doing is taking a new view on providing platform security on AWS, focusing more on the resources that you have in the enterprise and not necessarily on the alerts and findings that you may be inundated with in your security practice. Our approach to developing this new platform has really been informed by our customers. We have some statistics here that our marketing team has supplied. But really what our customers are telling us, the challenges that they've had is a lack of visibility into where cloud assets exist, what their life cycle's like, and they don't have a firm understanding of the threats they face on a daily basis. And this is in spite of, or I would say it's also contributed to, by the fact that they have so many tooling. They have so much information and data sources that are feeding into their security practice. It's really hard to cope with all of that information and make it operational. And then ultimately that makes remediation and action very difficult, right? So if I have a lot of data, it could be useful data. I don't know, maybe it's not useful data, you just don't know. And so what we set out to do with our customers is find a new way to operationalize data. Now, to set a baseline, when we talk about what cloud platform security is, it's typically categorized in these focus areas. Each of these areas is important to your cloud security, your cloud governance. But ideally, we have to look at as many of these as possible and combine the visibility of these different focus areas wherever we can. What happens is cloud platform security providers will ingest data in these areas. They'll typically provide you with a proprietary engine that resolves the security data into some sort of insightful finding. But at the end of the day, you still have a lot of alerts, you have a lot of findings, but they're not well organized, right? And then you're probably trying to decide, well, do I use first-party services, such as those provided by AWS, or do I use third-party services? There are trade-offs between the two. First-party services, obviously they're cloud native. They're going to cover the entire cloud estate. You're going to have complete visibility typically if you enable those across your cloud environment. But some of the trade-offs may be in the depth of features, right? Or the ability to integrate third-party services in your own defined ecosystem. On the other side, there are third-party services. You have ISV vendors that run with and on your cloud providers. Some of the advantages might be, single pane of glass, dashboards that are easy to understand. You can integrate with third parties. And as pure play solutions, they typically are very good or can be very good at providing whatever particular capability that you need. In this case, maybe it's posture management in your cloud environment. But we took a brand new way of looking at all of this. We didn't go about trying to reinvent the wheel. We didn't try to create our own security engines that could enrich data for you. What we did was we worked with AWS in this case to take the best that they have, align with best practices, using tools like Macie, Inspector, GuardDuty, feeding that through Security Hub as your engine, reusing those engines, and feeding that into a single platform that can operationalize your information. And that's the key focus here. What we're launching with FortiCNP with AWS is the ability to go from information and findings and alerts to insights into risk, right? So this is all about risk insights. And it's not only about risk insights, but it's about workflows. So those are the two things I would ask you to take away. On one side, we start with our resources, our information about those resources, and we have findings, the typical alerts that you would get from your flow logs, your GuardDuty findings on malicious IPs and botnets sources, as an example. And we take all of that information and we ingest it through a process called resource risk insights. So we're taking the configurations, the vulnerabilities, the real-time threats, and we're calculating risks, and we're prioritizing those risks for you. We're taking information about your environment and how you prioritize information, or you prioritize those resources in your environment, and we're distilling that into risk scores. And those risk scores are important because now we can start to contextualize the value of a particular resource over time. Is my security posture getting better? Is it getting worse relative to the number of resources and the footprint that I have as that footprint grows? And we can make those insights actionable. So from left to right, we have an entire workflow for the security operator. And this is important because this is not something that you've typically gotten from a security provider before that's provided a security posture management platform. Now, what I'm doing is teasing you here with some of the high-level information. I'm going to ask you to stop by the Fortinet booth in just a little bit to get a full demo of this platform. And we will walk you through some of those workflows. So if you put yourself in the shoes of a security practitioner, I don't know if any of you have worked in a SOC before. Maybe you do now, or you are a security operator yourselves. But this is what you have to contend with on a regular basis. Day in and day out, you have a backlog of alerts. You have documents and malware that infects those documents. You have lots of storage repositories. You have all of this information. You have to roll up reports to senior executives. So there's different levels of depth in terms of how information is reported. But what we do is we take all of that and we focus on, firstly, threat management and risk management, right? So as a security operator, I can see my threats in a very simple way because I'm focused on that EC2 instance that may be running my ERP, which is going to be far more important than maybe a shadow IT workload, right? And I can look at risks maybe specific to the operating system that has CVE vulnerabilities that could become a threat. And then I can take that information and I can drive that to better compliance and integrate that into my security practice in terms of the DevSecOps workflows that I have. You know, maybe that's pushing into an orchestration platform, a SIM, something like Jira for CI/CD, and ServiceNow for ITSM, right? These are examples of what you can do with that data. So let me be very practical about it. So you're getting this information from AWS. This is a view of flow logs. You've got a lot of logs. You know, what do you do with that? There's good data buried in there, but you have to sift through all of that. Maybe you have findings in Security Hub, so you're curating your own filters. You're making your own queries. You're trying to understand what do these workload EC2 IDs mean, maybe on the right side, but it's very alert oriented. So what you have is this perpetual backlog of alerts. And then when you dig into an alert, maybe this is what you see. This is the JSON of a particular finding. And now I have to go through this and figure out what all of this means and how do I take action against it, right? So imagine doing that about 100,000 times. It's not practical, right? So what we do is we're taking this and we're saying, all right, let's not focus on alerts. Let's focus on the resources. So here in the simple dashboard, this is just a widget that onboarded resources. And now I can see the number of resources, workloads that I have in my environment. I can group those by organizational unit. So I can say there are certain counts that run that have AWS resources that fall to certain maybe business units, individuals, application development teams. I can group those. And then I can see how the risks relative to the number of resources that I've deployed trend over time. Obviously, we want the blue risk score to go down, even though the number of resources tends to go up, right? And that gives us a general idea from a histogram perspective of what our environment looks like. And then we have other quick views on information, such as active threats in the network. So it's very clear, very easy to read. So think about all those screenshots that I had before that show you all of those findings. Well, being able to distill it in something very simple like this, everything on here is clickable. I can take action against botnets if I wanted to. I could look at specific resources across my different cloud environments. It's meant to be very actionable. So everything that we're doing here is very workflow oriented. So maybe I've decided that I'd like to look at a particular resource, maybe an EC2 instance as shown here. On the right side of the screen, I have a risk score. This risk score is going to be calculated based on, one, how we default assign priority, based on the level of the CVE level of maybe a particular vulnerability on that resource, misconfigurations that don't align with best practices in AWS. Security groups are a good example. But we have lots and lots of findings and alerts that go into that. Again, this is being fed by the native AWS services. We're not asking you not to use those. We think it's a best practice to gain ultimate visibility to use those services. I can see some of the highlights, little widgets that I can hover over that will ultimately tell me what particular threats I'm faced with. Maybe it's a malicious connection that's actively using an SSH port as an example. But this really starts, what you're getting here is what we call risk resource insights. And this is what we've patented to distill all of that information and all of those findings into a very consumable scoring methodology. And the nice thing about the scoring methodology is it's not something that we're telling you, this is how what the score is going to be. That's like telling you this is high, this is medium, this is low. That doesn't add a lot of value. What we're doing is we're allowing you to take metadata that you've assigned to those workloads. This is a production workload. It maybe runs my SAP or other ERP system. It has some critical intellectual property on this storage volume. And I want to make that more important. So you can change the weighting of the calculation to drive priority to certain workloads for the security operator. So with that score defined by the business, it comes to the top of my list. I know what I need to address. I can see in a very clear way here what are the threats I'm facing categorically. So we have a certain number of threats. Those threats are scored. I can view those findings and start to address those and start to work through this particular high-value resource. From a workflow and best practices perspective, I'll go from threats to vulnerabilities and work my way from threats back over to the left. And as I come through these, I'm really addressing the most critical things first, right? Threats are active. Somebody's doing something in your environment. I want to address that. Vulnerabilities are going to be things that could potentially be threats, right? So inspector is feeding information about OS vulnerabilities, malicious user activity, maybe internal users or external users. Risk management is going to tell me about risks in my environment, configuration issues potentially. And then I can see associated resources. So if I want to get a perspective of, okay, I have a workload that's at risk, it's actively being attacked, I want to look at what are the associated resources attached to that, what's the blast radius. So diagrammatically, I can see other objects attached to that particular workload. Now, I don't have all those screenshots here, and I got ahead of my clicks. But the idea is that we have workflows. So once I've decided I want to work on something in particular, so right here I have a particular risk item that I've clicked into this workload. I'm addressing one of the high priority items. It tells us where it came from, AWS Inspector, and then we provide in very clear way what the actual root cause is, and then we also provide a way to remediate that. So we give the operator very clear instructions on how to take action against a particular risk in their environment. And this is where I think we're really, this is again driven by what customers have told us. We've talked to them about, hey, what are you getting from your cloud posture platforms? What are you not getting? And this is where the gap lies, right? Everybody can do a database dump, and they can run an engine against data, and then they can tell you what all of these alerts are. We've patented a way to provide a workflow-based system that provides accurate or meaningful scores to the business. Now, on the container front, we also provide workflow support for container vulnerability management. So while this piece is not specifically being launched today as we are with the risk resource insights, it's something that we've done very well. So if you have microservices environments that need the same sort of vulnerability management, we want to run your Kubernetes clusters against CIS benchmarks for runtime support and compliance, we support all of that with direct integration into the build, deploy, and run processes. Whatever CI/CD process you're using or tooling you're using, we can integrate with those to support pre-runtime inspection to make sure that there's compliance throughout the application delivery process. Now, from a benefits perspective, we really focused on simplifying the security operational experience. We didn't go and recreate the wheel by creating new alerting and engines to develop risk insights, or excuse me, alerting insights. AWS already has those. We wanted to leverage those, and that's where we partnered very well with AWS. What we did provide was a simple way to onboard. So think about being able to onboard an AWS account, turn on those services by basically running a CloudFormation template with a very limited IAM role, right? And then secondly, we enrich the cloud data by adding our own threat intelligence. So when you look at those active threat details, we're using our FortiGuard threat intelligence services to identify that malicious activity. Maybe there's a particular IP on the internet that's connected to one of your workloads. We can tell you that that's a botnet. So we're using our own threat intelligence combined with AWS services to give you the best security coverage possible. The scalability is not an issue here either. If I'm using AWS's services, you already know that they're scalable, and so we don't run into scalability issues that you might find from other platforms. And so focusing on resource risk and correlating findings into what we call RRIs, we make things immediately actionable. And we can identify remediation very quickly. This has been a collaborative approach with AWS. As we've worked with our customers, they're seeing increased value from the investments that they've already made into AWS services and those security services. And really, the return on investment isn't just from using this tool because this tool is better. What this tool is doing, what FortiCNP is doing, is decreasing the time and motion efforts of your security operator's day. We're giving them time back, and so that's where the real return on investment is being realized. So you can focus your human assets on higher priority, higher value activities. So I'm going to summarize. The security posture is really strengthened because we drive effective workflows for the security operators. We focus on the resources, right? So the workloads, the functions, the data stores, and not on the individual findings, right? They come after the resource. Resource risk insights provide historical information with ongoing context in terms of what the threats are against that particular resource. Secondly, or lastly, the security operations team, again, as I mentioned before, gets time back because they're more efficient. It allows the practitioner to focus on higher value activities, and they have a greater impact from within their own role. So FortiCNP, we just launched it today. I'd really encourage you to come by the Fortinet booth right over here. We'll give you an end-to-end demo in much more detail than what I've provided here. But it really is a game changer in terms of how we can provide information that drives effective workflows in your security practice. So with that, I appreciate the time. My call to action is if you go to our Fortinet landing pages, fortinet.com, or through the AWS Marketplace. This is available directly through the Marketplace. You can give it a 14-day free trial. We have guides and documentation on how to use the tool most effectively, best practices. We have a great video message. If you look up on YouTube, just simply search FortiCNP there. There's a great message from both AWS and Fortinet. Thank you, guys. Any questions? I'll take any questions that you guys have. You might have to project a little bit. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.